senator has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I want to remind everybody that today is George Washington's birthday, and he's a very important person in this Commonwealth, which is why we have him centered in our state capitol since it was built, and the founder of this country. And just if you could indulge me for just 2 minutes, on that day, usually the senator who represents his home, every once in a while his farms, gives a speech about him, as my seatmate reminded me of. I just want to point one situation in the body that I learned about recently about George Washington that I had never heard about, which is that back when he was the general of the Army, the first general of the Army, towards the end of the war, they were all waiting for the things to wrap up, and they were all sitting in Newburgh, New York, camped out, waiting for the war to end. And many of his officers were unhappy because the Army had not been paid. And eventually, their anger grew to the point where they were ready to basically march on Washington, or march on Philadelphia at the time, to try to get their salaries paid. General Washington got wind of that meeting, and he went over there. It was basically a mutiny of his officers, and he walked in to confront them about what they were doing, because we didn't really have a government then. We had a government. We had the Continental Congress, but it wasn't really all that functional. And the Articles of Confederation were kind of a disaster. But the Army was basically, and his officers were talking about taking them and their 17,000 troops marching on Philadelphia to get paid. Washington walked into this meeting on March the 15th, 1783, and reminded the officers of how disloyal they were being, and that he didn't think they were being very patriotic. They didn't have anything. They didn't really listen to him. At the end of his speech, he said, "Gentlemen, if you will permit me to put on my spectacles." And he pulled them out of his pocket, and he said, "For I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." And by most accounts, the act that he did that day, and once the officers realized how much the war had humanized him, how much it had made him gray, how much it had made him, ruined his vision, how much it had made him not the general they'd seen him before, but it really weakened him. It deeply touched them, and many of them openly wept. And shortly thereafter, they decided they weren't going to march on Washington. But what most people attribute that meeting to was the beginning and cementing of civilian control of our United States military, and that's one of the many traditions that came out of George Washington. And I think it's also important to note that I remember last year I talked to you all about how Washington actually led a lot by retreating in many ways. Retreating in many battles. He also retreated. He surrendered his generalship of the Continental Army. He also surrendered the presidency when he didn't have to. He also didn't get these guys paid. But by taking that act that day and doing that, we now have civilian control of the United States military, which is an important hallmark in this country, a fundamental founding precept of this country, and it's because of the guy down the hall in our rotunda. And I think it's important that we remember these things. When we remember General Washington today on his 293rd birthday, and Madam President, I would also ask that when we adjourn on the honor and memory of General Washington, the founder of our country, and I think the first President of the United States of America as well.